You never expect your life to change on an ordinary night shift, but that's exactly what happened to me. If I told you that I, a simple ambulance driver from New Mexico, once gave a ride to beings that weren't from this earth, you'd probably roll your eyes. But listen carefully before you decide I'm crazy, because this story has haunted me for years, and I swear every word is true. It all started on a dry summer night, the kind where the desert air feels heavy even after sundown. My partner, a paramedic named Laura, and I had just finished transporting an elderly man to the hospital. We were driving back to the station along a lonely stretch of highway that cuts through the mesas and cactus fields outside of Gallup. There was no traffic, no lights, nothing but the hum of the tires and the occasional coyote darting across the asphalt. Then, without warning, our radio went dead. No static, no voice, just silence. At the same time, the dashboard lights flickered and dimmed, though the engine kept running. I slowed the ambulance, thinking it was some kind of electrical fault, when Laura gasped and pointed at the sky. Above us, where the stars should have been, a massive triangular shadow hovered. It didn't make a sound. No roar of engines, no chopping blades, just a heavy stillness that pressed down on us like invisible hands. For a moment, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, but then three lights, soft, bluish-white, appeared at each corner of the shape. They pulsed in a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. And then it vanished. Not shot off, not faded away, just blinked out of existence, as if it had never been there. My stomach twisted. Laura whispered, "Did you see that?" Before I could answer, the headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a group of people, maybe hikers in trouble. Three figures stood huddled together, their thin bodies wrapped in what looked like torn fabric or metallic cloth that caught the light in strange ways. They were small, barely 5 feet tall, with long arms that hung awkwardly. Their heads, God, I can still picture them, were larger than normal, the eyes dark and reflective like pools of oil. I slammed the brakes, and the ambulance lurched to a stop a few yards from them. Instinct kicked in. Out here, you don't ignore people stranded at night. But as I opened the door, a rush of dread hit me. These weren't people. They weren't like anyone I'd ever seen. Yet they looked terrified. Not threatening, not aggressive, just lost, confused, and scared. Laura grabbed my arm, whispering, "Don't." But one of the beings stepped forward, its movements slow, deliberate, as if gravity pulled differently on it. It raised its hand, not a weapon, just a gesture, and in my head, I swear I heard a voice. Not with my ears, not in English, but inside my thoughts. Help. My mouth went dry. I looked at Laura, and she shook her head furiously. But something in me couldn't just leave them there. I waved them over, my hand trembling. They hesitated, glancing at each other in a way that felt almost human, then shuffled toward the ambulance. When they climbed inside, the air grew heavier, charged, like static before a storm. The interior lights flickered, then steadied. Laura was pale as chalk, staring at them as if any second they might vanish. I pulled back onto the highway, driving faster than I should have, the desert racing past in the dark. I didn't even know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. My passengers sat silently in the back, their enormous eyes fixed on me through the rearview mirror. And that's when it hit me. If anyone found out what was in my ambulance, if anyone saw, our lives would never be the same. The government, the press, the skeptics, they'd tear us apart. But more than that, the fear in those beings' eyes told me one undeniable truth. They were running from something. And whatever they were running from, it wasn't far behind. The road ahead was a ribbon of black cutting through the desert, but in the rearview mirror, I couldn't stop looking at them. Three beings, huddled together on the stretcher and bench, their strange garments shimmering faintly in the dim ambulance lights. Their eyes were so impossibly large, catching even the smallest reflection, making it seem as though they were glowing from within. One of them kept its gaze on me, unblinking, and though its mouth never moved, the same faint impression pressed against my mind again. Help. Safe. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Laura was frozen in her seat, whispering prayers under her breath, glancing at me as if begging me to turn around, to throw them out, to end this insanity. But something stronger than fear drove me. An instinct, maybe, or just a refusal to abandon someone who looked desperate. That was my job, wasn't it? To pick up the lost, the sick, the broken, even if they weren't human. We had driven maybe 10 minutes when the first sign of trouble appeared. A deep rumble trembled through the ambulance, not from the road or the engine, but from above. I leaned forward, scanning the sky through the windshield, and then I saw it. A glowing streak moving low, fast, parallel to the highway. At first, I thought it was a meteor, but meteors don't change direction. This did. It banked, slowed, and began to follow us. "They're looking for them," Laura whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking. Her words sent a shiver straight into my bones. The aliens in the back stirred, shifting uneasily, their thin fingers gripping the rails of the stretcher as though bracing for impact. I pressed harder on the gas. The ambulance wasn't built for speed, and the engine whined in protest, but I didn't care. The desert blurred at the edges of the headlights as the glowing object tracked us like a hunter. Then, suddenly, the interior of the cab filled with a blinding white light, pouring in from above, so bright it erased the night. My heart thundered as I swerved, fighting to keep the ambulance steady. Laura covered her eyes, crying out. And then, just as quickly, it vanished. The darkness returned, the stars above twinkling innocently, as if nothing had happened. But the silence inside the vehicle was unbearable. I glanced back. One of the beings had raised its hand toward me, palm outward, as if pushing against something invisible. Its massive eyes locked with mine, and again the word filled my thoughts: drive. So I did. I drove until the desert road ended in a small town, a scattering of gas stations, shuttered diners, and motels half asleep under buzzing neon lights. My mind raced with questions. Where was I taking them? Who, or what, was after them? How long before someone noticed an ambulance carrying passengers it wasn't supposed to? I pulled into the dark corner of an empty parking lot behind a boarded-up laundromat, cut the engine, and sat there in the suffocating silence. The aliens didn't move at first. Then the smallest of them leaned forward, its gaze steady, and the strangest thing happened. My head filled with images, flashing so fast I could barely process them. A sky filled with stars, but not our stars. A world with oceans the color of copper, mountains like glass. And then fire, darkness, a fall through the void, fear. The images ended as suddenly as they began, leaving me breathless, trembling against the steering wheel. Laura grabbed my shoulder. "What did you see?" she demanded, her eyes wild. "What did they show you?" But I couldn't answer, because another realization slammed into me at that moment. The night was no longer silent. A low hum pulsed through the air again, closer now, vibrating the metal walls of the ambulance. They had found us. The beings shrank back, their bodies trembling, their eyes darting toward the roof as though expecting it to be ripped open. Laura clutched my arm. "We can't fight this," she whispered. And she was right. But then, one of them reached forward and touched her hand. She flinched, but didn't pull away. I watched her face change, the panic softening, her breathing steadying as if some invisible calm had been poured into her. She turned toward me with a look I'll never forget, not fear, but determination. "We can't let them take these beings back," she said quietly. "Whatever's chasing them, it's not here to help." Outside, the humming grew louder, a vibration deep enough to rattle the bolts loose. Lights began sweeping the streets of the town, strange beams of blue and white scanning between the buildings like searchlights. We were cornered. I slammed the gear shift into drive, tires squealing as the ambulance roared back onto the highway. There was no plan, no destination, only the road and the blinding certainty that we were running not just for their lives, but for ours too. The highway stretched endlessly before us, black ribbons shimmering in the thin moonlight. But the farther I drove, the more the feeling of being hunted grew. Behind us, the glow of the strange searchlights cut across the desert like blades, sweeping closer, narrowing in on us. Every bump in the road made the stretcher rattle. Every gust of wind felt like it carried whispers I couldn't understand. The beings sat silently, their huge reflective eyes fixed on me in the rearview mirror, and I couldn't tell if they trusted me or if they simply had no other choice. Laura kept glancing over her shoulder, her lips moving in silent words, as though bargaining with whatever higher power might be listening. I pressed the gas harder, but the ambulance wasn't made for outrunning anything, least of all whatever kind of craft could descend from the sky and shine daylight into the night. Then something changed. The being sitting closest to the stretcher leaned forward again, its thin, elongated fingers gripping the back of my seat. My chest tightened, my hands slick against the wheel, but when its skin touched the leather, a faint glow pulsed from its palm, spreading like veins of light. At the same time, the engine roared louder, stronger, smoother, as if it had just been given new life. I didn't understand it, but I knew one thing. We were suddenly going faster, far faster than this ambulance should have been able to go. The desert blurred. The headlights cut a tunnel through the dark, and the speedometer needle pushed far past the limits it was ever meant to reach. "They're doing something," I whispered hoarsely, and Laura just stared, wide-eyed. Behind us, the lights shifted, trying to keep pace, and for the first time since this began, they started to fall back. A surge of hope sparked in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could outrun whatever was hunting them. But hope never lasts long. The road ahead suddenly exploded in a brilliant wash of blue light, and a shape materialized directly above us, blotting out the stars. It wasn't the triangular craft from earlier. This one was circular, with concentric rings of glowing symbols shifting like a living clock. It hovered silently, but the pressure in the air was unbearable, a weight pushing us down into our seats. I fought the wheel as if invisible hands were trying to drag the ambulance off the road. The aliens in the back began to tremble violently, their garments shimmering brighter, their eyes locked on the ceiling. I heard it then, faint, broken words in my head that weren't mine. "Hide safe, Earth, trust." The flashes of thought came with a surge of images again, slamming into my mind. A laboratory filled with blinding lights, white-coated figures leaning over them, metal restraints, panic, escape, then our desert, our sky, the search that had never stopped. My stomach dropped as the truth hit me. They weren't just lost travelers. They were fugitives. But fugitives from what? The craft above us let out a pulse of sound so deep it rattled my teeth. The ambulance shook violently, tires skidding across the asphalt, and I felt certain this was the end. Then, suddenly, the smallest of the beings pressed its palm flat against the window. A flash of light burst outward, and everything changed. The night around us bent, folded, like heat rising off asphalt, and the sound of the pursuing craft was swallowed whole. For a single breathless moment, it felt like we weren't on the road anymore. Like the desert itself had peeled away, and we were driving through some pocket of silence cut off from the world. My ears rang with the absence of sound. Laura clutched her chest, whispering, "What did they do? Where are we?" But I had no answer. The beings glowed dimmed, their shoulders slumping as though the effort had drained them. The world snapped back in an instant, the highway returning, the desert stretching around us, the stars burning overhead. But when I looked behind us, the lights were gone. No humming, no glow, nothing. Just silence. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. Because deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't over. The beings sat slouched, exhausted, but their eyes still fixed on me, full of something I didn't want to admit looked like fear. "They're not done," Laura whispered, and her voice cracked like a breaking branch. "They'll come back." And she was right, because as the first pale streaks of dawn lit the horizon, I saw something else, far off in the desert, rising like a mirage. A tower of light, thin as a needle, piercing the sky. It pulsed, once, twice, sending ripples across the clouds. The beings stirred, their heads turning toward it as one, and for the first time, I heard something in their voices that wasn't only fear. It was longing. Home. And suddenly I realized, they weren't just running. They were trying to reach something. The needle of light grew taller the closer we came, glowing against the pale dawn like a beacon that didn't belong to this earth. I couldn't look away, even as the road narrowed into a cracked two-lane strip winding through desert hills. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But the ambulance kept pushing forward, the engine still thrumming with that unnatural energy, as if the beings themselves were guiding it toward their destination. Laura sat rigid beside me, her face pale and streaked with tears she hadn't noticed falling. Her hands were clenched tight on her lap, but she hadn't said a word since the light first appeared. In the rearview mirror, the beings had changed. Their exhaustion was giving way to something else, anticipation. They leaned forward, their luminous eyes fixed on the horizon, their thin bodies trembling not with fear now, but with urgency. And then the air shifted again. The low hum returned, distant at first, then growing like a swarm of hornets. I glanced at the sky, and my blood turned cold. Shapes were descending. 3, maybe 4, sleek dark crafts dropping from the clouds, their edges shimmering against the rising sun. They were hunting, closing in fast. The aliens in the back let out a soft, almost mournful sound, not with their mouths, but directly into my head, like a chorus of thoughts that weren't words. I gritted my teeth, pressing the gas harder, even though the pedal was already to the floor. The road cracked beneath us, the suspension groaning, but the ambulance surged forward, as if refusing to fail now. The tower of light pulsed again, brighter, and for the first time I noticed something strange. The land around it wasn't natural. The rocks seemed to curve unnaturally, bending inward like metal pulled by a magnet, forming a crater that had never been there before. The crafts behind us gained speed, streaks of light cutting the sky as they prepared to intercept. Laura finally broke her silence, gripping my arm with a strength that startled me. "They're not going to make it if we don't help them," she said, her voice steady, resolved. I didn't know what she meant, but before I could ask, the smallest of the beings reached forward and touched my shoulder. A rush of warmth spread through me, filling every vein, every breath, every thought. Suddenly I knew I had to drive straight into the crater, no matter what. The ambulance barreled down the final stretch of road, the crafts above descending, beams of blinding light spearing toward us. The tires screamed as I swerved, dodging a blast that scorched the asphalt, leaving a glowing scar across the highway. Laura cried out, bracing against the dashboard. My heart pounded, every muscle trembling, but I didn't let go. The crater yawned before us now, the tower of light at its center, humming with a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. And then it happened. One of the crafts dove low, cutting us off, its underbelly glowing with an energy that made the entire ambulance shake. There was no way through. But the beings didn't panic. They rose to their feet, bracing against the walls, their eyes blazing like stars. Together, they lifted their hands, and in a surge of brilliance, the world bent again. The craft ahead shimmered, rippled, and vanished like smoke. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and the next thing I knew, we were inside the crater, racing toward the base of the tower. The light grew unbearable, pouring through the windshield, burning against my skin, yet leaving no pain. The beings moved toward it, drawn like magnets, their forms beginning to blur at the edges, as though they were already halfway gone. I slammed the brakes, the ambulance skidding to a halt just yards from the tower. Laura and I sat frozen, watching as the beings stepped out into the blazing glow. They turned back once, just once, and though no words passed their lips, I felt the meaning in my chest as clear as if it had been spoken. "Thank you." Then they were gone. Their bodies dissolved into the light, rising upward like sparks carried into the sky, merging with the tower until there was nothing left but brilliance. The hum faded, the air stilled, and the crafts in the sky, every last one, vanished in an instant, leaving only the empty dawn above the desert. For a long time, neither Laura nor I moved. The tower of light flickered, pulsed one last time, then collapsed inward, leaving only a flat, barren crater where it had stood. The silence that followed was unbearable. I finally turned off the engine, my hands trembling so hard I could barely grip the keys. Laura looked at me, her eyes hollow, and whispered, No one's ever going to believe this." She was right. We drove back in silence, the morning sun rising over the desert as if nothing had happened. By the time we reached the station, the ambulance looked the same, the road looked the same, and the world kept turning, blind to what had slipped through its fingers that night. I've carried this story for years, locked behind silence and disbelief, haunted by the memory of eyes too large to belong to us, and the feeling that, for a brief moment, I was part of something far greater than myself. Maybe you'll believe me, maybe you won't, but I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, beyond the stars, those fugitives are still running.